Inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
Jesse, you've been investing in rentals for about 3.5 years now. How would you say everything's been going?
Overall, great. We've had some good things, we've had some bad things, but overall, great.
What would you say is the worst thing that's happened to you?
We've had some pretty big repairs that we had to dip into our savings for.
Jesse was with us on the podcast about 1.5 years ago, and at that time, he was profiting about $1,100 a month on his rental properties. He had a goal that he wanted to get to $4,000 a month. So on the show today, we're going to check in with him and see how things are going with working towards his goal. We'll talk about some of those big challenges he had in the last year with some of those big repairs. We'll see what happened and how he survived it. And we'll also talk about Airbnb. Jesse thought he could make more money by converting one of his rental properties over to an Airbnb. We'll see if it worked out. We'll see if that really increased his cash flow. Joining us on the show today from Grand Junction, Colorado is Jesse Beynon. We'll take a really quick break to thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll talk to Jesse. It's a lot of work to find a really good rental property. And when you actually find that property, you want to make sure you're working with a lender that can get that loan closed. The lender that I recommend is Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. She's a nationwide lender and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She has a ton of loan programs, and she can find something customized to you for your situation. If you want to find out more or you're ready to get started today, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com. NMLS 42056.
Rental Income Podcast.
Jesse, what does your portfolio look like?
Yeah, so right now we have a 4-unit and a 2-unit, so a duplex, so really just 6 units total. But the 4-unit is a home that has 2 basement apartments and then a detached garage apartment. So it's really just a normal home, a nice Victorian home, and then 2 basement apartments and then a detached garage apartment.
Okay, so that's the way your portfolio looked when we talked last. So you haven't bought anything new?
We haven't bought anything new, no.
Okay. And when we talked last, you were house hacking in the duplex. Are you still living there?
Yes.
Okay. And you had 5 kids living in the duplex. Any more kids or?
Actually, yes.
Oh, really? Wow. Congratulations. Okay. So you've got 6 kids living in the duplex. That's incredible. All right. So I want to hear kind of the good and bad. So it sounds like overall owning rental properties for you over the last 3.5 years has been good, but you've had some bad things happen. And I want to kind of talk about some of the bad things that have happened to you and how you overcame them. So it sounds like you've had some huge repairs. Tell me what happened.
So both of them actually happened around the same time, probably within 6 months of each other. So this is kind of the testament to having a good lump sum in your savings. But the first one was on our duplex. We had just moved in and things were, running along pretty smoothly. And then all of a sudden we realized that there were some piping issues below, in the basement area. And unbeknownst to us, it just kept getting worse. And we have a buddy who's a really good plumber, and he was thankfully able to come over and fix it all, but it took a lot and it cost a lot of money, probably around, $4,000. And then probably 6 months later, we had a boiler go out in our 4-unit. And so we called the same plumber and he came over and fixed that. And that was another setback of about $3,500. So,
okay. So about $7,500. And that's the thing with owning rental properties. Like that stuff sounds like it's crazy that would happen, but that's the way it works. You get hit with big stuff back to back. So like, how did that work? Like going through that, were you kind of freaking out at the time when you were having to write those big checks?
I wouldn't say freaking out. I felt comfortable because we had saved up money for that. But at the same time, it was painful to see that leave your savings when you are feeling totally fine, and then all of a sudden you start to get a little uncomfortable because your savings is going out the door. But
right. Yeah, but I guess that really shows how important it is to have savings. So how do you budget for repairs? Like, do you have a set number of cash that you keep in the bank for stuff like this? Or do you just add a certain amount of money every month?
So Jessica and I sat down, and this is really before the ball started rolling as fast as it has, and we determined that we needed 3 to 6 months savings. And so for us and all of our expenses, that ended up being around 20,000. And so we were kind of working towards that, and we'd gotten pretty close, and then some of those setbacks happened. And so, $7,000, $7,500 wasn't all of it, but at the same time, it was a chunk enough to make it uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's a good emergency fund. So $20,000, is that just for your rentals, or is that an emergency fund for your rentals and then also your personal life?
Also our personal life.
Okay. All right. So you got 20 grand set aside. And so then how did you replenish that? As you wrote those big checks, how did you go about building that money back up again?
Well, thankfully, I do a couple of side gigs. I'm in the National Guard, and we had a bonus that came, and that kind of plugged back in. And then, some tax return stuff. And so really there isn't much of a monthly savings that we set aside. I actually want to get to that point, but it's been more just in chunks. We just throw it all back into the savings.
All right. So what works for you is not setting money aside. I know a lot of people we have on the podcast that they set aside a certain amount every month, put that into savings. But for you, it just works better to have that emergency fund there. And then when you need it, you just dip into it.
I would say it's worked better that way so far, but I see the wisdom in the monthly savings. And so I want to get to the point, probably we're actually close to the point now where we can just start tucking away, a chunk of the profits every month.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you're really kind of in like what I would call the danger zone with 5 rental units, because like you don't have a ton of cash flow where, people that are making $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 a month, a lot of them can handle a big expense just out of that month's cash flow. But with your cash flow not being a huge amount of money every month, it makes it just a little bit more dangerous. Like, would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm kind of feeling that urge to start the monthly savings, so that we're not waiting for a tax return to feel a little more comfortable. We're just doing it a little bit at a time, bite size. So,
sure. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's a great lesson, just to realize that big things can happen, and it didn't knock you out of the game. Was there a time when you considered giving up on rentals?
Not giving up. When the market continued to go up, and now things are softening a little bit as far as prices go, but I remember thinking, man, this is probably at the peak. If I sold one of these, we could probably live in the other one and take all that over 100K in equity, and just sit on that until we either decide to buy something else, or we could pay down our one mortgage. And so I've thought of that, not necessarily quitting, but I've thought of selling at one of the properties to try to help with that cushion, but we ultimately didn't do it.
Okay. Yeah. I think long term, that's probably a good decision to hold on to them. Now, talk to me about your Airbnb. So you've turned a couple of your units into Airbnbs. What was the thinking there? Like, why did you convert them from long-term rentals to Airbnbs?
Well, I wanted to try it. I wanted to experience it. I think if you're going to get into real estate, it's very forgiving. It's very easy to try things, and if you like something more, you can kind of go back to how you had it or whatever. But I hadn't tried it fully, and so we decided to try it. And I'd heard that you can make more money, and so it made some sense to try to make some more money. And so we took one of the basement apartments in that 4-unit, and we, had some extra furniture from some of the other places that we'd rented some of the other apartments, and we kind of put it in there. I think we bought maybe a new couch or something, but we had some of the other furniture. So it didn't cost a lot to start. And then once we got it going, it seemed pretty simple. People were booking pretty quickly. We were making more money than we had made as a normal tenant. But we realized that with me cleaning or my wife cleaning at the time, it was more management, obviously. So when we think about that passive income idea, I think that there's probably in some circumstances completely passive income. But in our situation, nothing has been totally passive. There's always been effort and management, and depending on how much management and effort you want to put in, the proceeds are usually a little bit higher. So
yeah, that's a good point, because like there is a trade-off that sure, you're making more money, but you're constantly dealing with the cleaning. You're having to deal with coordinating bookings, answering questions. Yeah, that makes sense that you're making a little bit more money, but there's more work involved. So like how much more money, like after everything, how much more cash flow were you making, say on a good month? I'm sure it varies seasonally, but to say on a good month, how much extra money would you be making after all your expenses?
On a good month, so if you remember back to our other one, we were making the other interview we had, we were making $1,100 a month. Once we converted actually 2 of our apartments to an Airbnb, we were making on a good month, over $2,000 a month. So it almost doubled it, or probably did double it at times. But I would say probably on average, we're around $1,700 or $1,800. So after we pay our cleaner, now we have a cleaner who comes in and cleans versus us. And after taxes and all that, we make probably about $1,700 or $1,800.
Okay. And so right now your plan is, of the 2 units that you've converted to Airbnb, you're going to switch one of them back to a long-term rental, and then you're going to keep one of them as Airbnb?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Why are you doing that? Like, why is it just for the ease of half the work of only having one Airbnb? Like, I guess, like, why not convert both of them back to long-term rentals?
Yeah, good question. I think the main thing with me is to mitigate risk, because we've been through the majority of a winter with an Airbnb now. And so we've seen that the numbers do dip quite a bit. And you basically, at least in our situation, we made about as much as we would have with a normal tenant in those cold winter months. And so with those cold winter months, dipping down, I didn't want to have 2 apartments that dipped down and possibly even go lower and get myself in trouble, if that makes sense. So we wanted to mitigate the risk. We wanted to choose one of them to have as a normal tenant, and then the Airbnb, and still have a little bit of risk with that Airbnb, but not too much.
That makes sense. Yeah, because with those long-term tenants, they just pay you every month. It's so consistent, where with the Airbnb, I can see how it fluctuates, and especially in the winter. So yeah, that makes sense. Now, let me ask you this. Do you live close to, because you live in the duplex, do you live close to your fourplex?
Yes.
When you're like driving by or in the neighborhood, do you ever drive by and just see something you're not happy with and it causes you to have to get involved?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to, but I frequently, my family and I, we live probably 4 blocks from the 4-unit. And, there's a park right across the street from it. So we'll walk our dog over there. We'll go play at the park. And we walk by it very frequently. And many times when I do walk by it, I see something that makes me realize, like, okay, I need to go either pull those weeds, or I need to go over there and fix that trim or whatever. So yes, that is something that has been on my mind, and it is a tinge of frustration every time not every time, but sometimes when I walk by.
Yeah, I guess it's a trade-off. It's good that, if you see that you need to replace a piece of trim, it's better to know about it than not know about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could see how that would maybe consume a little bit of your life. So, all right. So as far as the bad things that have happened to you, it sounds like the Airbnb wasn't a real negative experience. So for the bad things happening that have happened to you, it's really just those big expenses.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the main issue.
Okay. Now, as far as good things that have happened to you, let's talk about some of the good things that have happened.
Okay, so I think number one, I probably don't even fully know all of the benefits, but I listen to your podcast a lot, and I listen to other podcasts about real estate, and I know that the equity that's being saved up, just because principal is being paid down by our tenants every month, is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And that forced savings plan that it's putting me into is ultimately going to be either a full retirement or an additional retirement or whatever you want to call it. But I probably don't even fully know those benefits, but I think those are going to be great.
Mm-hmm.
And then also we're making cash flow. So we're making money off of our properties, and whether it's an Airbnb or a normal tenant, we are cash flowing. And as long as we're smart with that savings and putting it where it needs to go, and we should be able to, I think, even buy more later on. I think I'm going to wait a little bit because of the market, but ultimately we would like to expand.
Now, when we talked last, you were making about $1,100 a month in profit after all the expenses. With the extra Airbnb revenue, and rents have generally gone up everywhere. Have you seen a lot of rent increases, or have you been able to raise rent a little bit?
Yeah, that's been really nice because the rents have gone up. And when we bought it, not even that long ago, we were making, I remember the first payment, we were making $665 a month on one of these apartments. And just now, my wife yesterday listed that Airbnb that we're going to turn back into a tenant at $995 a month.
Nice. Okay.
And so, that's a big chunk. And we could even go more. We're not looking to be the top of the market. We could push it another 100, maybe 150, at least in our area. But, we're satisfied with that. I think that's going to give us a great tenant, and we're going to be cash flowing quite a bit more than we were when we started. But yet our mortgage is still the same, right? Now, I will say some of our expenses have gone up. Like our electrical bill has gone up a little bit. And so that has, risen at the same time as rents. But, for the most part, the rents have far exceeded everything else.
What about the cash flow? So you were making $1,100 a month when we spoke last. How much profit are you making today?
So now we're around, I would say, $1,800 a month.
$1,800. Wow. Okay, a $700 increase, and that's just by pushing the rents up a little bit, and then with the extra little money you're making on the Airbnb.
Yep.
That's great. Now, when you first bought the property, when you first bought the fourplex, were you looking at any numbers like the 1% rule?
That's exactly what I was looking at.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I had listened to your podcast and basically been taught that. And so that's what I was looking for.
Okay. So did that fourplex meet the 1% rule when you bought it?
I thought initially it would. And then when we bought it, I noticed, so we bought it for $520,000. And at the time, the market was on its way up. It hadn't nearly reached the peak, which is nice. So we bought it a good time on it. But the rents came to, I think, $4,700 at the time. And so we were down a little bit, but still well over what our mortgage was, which was $2,000, roughly $2,000. And then a little bit for, internet fees and expenses, because we were living in the home itself. But yeah, now that the rents have gone up, we're actually above the 5,200. And so it's become higher than a 1% rule, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And then this duplex is now getting is nowhere near a 1% rule, to be honest, but it's getting closer to that 1% rule.
Right,
so.
right. It sounds like Jesse's doing great, and I love it. I think it's great that Jesse's been able to increase his cash flow without having to buy anything new. I think it's great that even with those 2 big repairs, it doesn't sound like it really set him back that much, and he's been able to build back his emergency savings. I think Jesse's on the right path, and I think if he can add another property or 2 here in the next few years, I think he'll be able to hit his goal. Well, if Jesse inspired you and you're ready to buy your first property or you want to add to your portfolio, the lender that I recommend is our sponsor today. It's Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. Chaley is a nationwide lender, and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She has a ton of different loan programs, and if you come across a deal that's a little bit tight with the interest rates going up, maybe your numbers don't exactly work, Chaley has a ton of different loan programs, and she can find something to get you a lower payment to make the deal work. If you want to find out more or you want to set up a time to talk to Chaley personally, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. Make sure you hit that follow button. I put out a new episode every single Tuesday, and if you're following the show, you'll get notified as soon as the next episode comes out. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.